Welcome to the ZebraZapps Editor Interactivity Concepts Tutorial Part 3 Property Wiring. This tutorial will cover the basic principles on how the ZebraZapps Editor allows developers to create interactivity without coding. In Part 2 of this tutorial, we discussed Object Message Center wiring from out triggers to in actions. We will continue with wiring between Message Center property values. Let's go to Event 1 and edit it. Now, wiring properties together is called property binding. It allows the developer to use property values of one object and synchronize it to another object's value. To demonstrate that, I will be adding a slider object to the stage. Let's rotate the slider on its side. And let's take a look at this object. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. If we open up the property values of the slider and go into the values category, there are different properties associated to the slider, such as slider percentage. You can see it's currently at 0. If we move the slider down its path, you can see now it's at 100%. So that slider percentage is always 0 to 100. The slider value is also 0 to 100, and that's because our slider start value and end value are currently 100. If I were to change that, let's say make that 200, now my end value is 200, my start value is 0, and as I move through the path, you can now see the slider value is going to end up at 200, but the slider value is currently at 100. So these are a few of the different properties we can use to create and to bind with. Actually, you can use any property to do property binding with, but we're going to be using these in this example. We'll jump back out and let's move this slider message center over to the side. We'll pull the slider down and we're going to go and add an eye chart on the screen. We're going to be showing an example on how eye shape affects eye focus. The first thing we're going to do is take a look at the message center for the eye chart. Now, if I look at a property, there's a property in the effects category that's blur. Now, currently blur is 0. If I move that through 100, you're going to see that that object is going to blur to different degrees. So that's the property we're going to be used to blur this object to show how eye shape and focus are related. We'll close that up. We'll go to our slider. We're going to use this value, slider percentage, to actually drive the blur of this object, and this is property binding. So just like we did with the ins and outs, if we go to the property ribbon and go to its wire port, we click and drag out a ribbon, go up to our object we want to talk to, go to its category, and we drop the wire on blur. So what this has done is added a blue wire, and these two properties are bound together. Now if I drag this over, you can see wherever I stop, those two values are going to be the same. I can go all the way up to 100, or I can move it back down to 0. And that is property binding. The next part of this interaction is we're going to use the slider value to actually drive the width of an image to show eyeball elongation and its effect on focus. So let's bring in an image from our resource center. Now it's a little big, so we can downsize it. Let's look at its properties. It's currently this width. We'll change that width to 130, and we can just reposition these images as we see fit. One of the things with this image selected, you're going to notice that it says keep the aspect ratio, which is true. We're going to say false. We want to stretch this and not have the aspect ratio stretch width and height. It'll just stretch width. So we're going to change aspect ratio to false. Here's its message center. What's nice about the ZebraZapps editor is we're currently in edit mode and we're able to see cause and effect relationships without having to run a preview mode. In this case, we want to elongate this image as the slider moves down its path. We're going to go and say, what's our start value? We want our start value to be equal to the current size of this image. So our start value is going to be 130 because that's our current image width. So we'll go back over to the slider value and we'll type in start value 130. So that means that when the slider is all the way over to the left, the slider value will be 130. And let's change our end value. Let's say we want it to stretch it 50 pixels, so we'll say 180 is our end value. And now, as you can see, when you move that slider, that it's going to start at 130, and when it's all the way to the right, it'll be at 180. And we want this slider value then to drive the width of, we'll go to its geometry, of the image. So we go to size width, and now you can see that this object, the slider, is driving both the blur and the width of this image. So let's see what happens. Okay, so it's stretching it, but one of the things we notice is it's actually stretching and it's going from the middle, and we want it to stretch from the left and move to the right only. So we're going to select that image. We're going to go up to its anchor point, and currently it's CC for center anchor point. We're going to move it to center left, and that will place the anchor point here. And now when we stretch it from 130 to 150, that it will stretch to the right. And you can see that as we stretch it out, we blur. Now let's just quickly add a few more images to help us get this point across. I'm going to take a background and just make a black background that sits on. So here's a rectangle, and we'll change its fill color to a solid and make that solid black, and then we'll send that to back by hitting the Shift B key. And then the next thing I'm going to do is take our polygon tool and just make kind of a simulated stream of light coming into the eye. And we're going to take that and we'll make this yellow. We'll give it a fill color or a fill percentage of, say, 34 or 35. We'll change its line weight to 1 and change its line to yellow. Basically what this is showing is in a perfectly shaped eye, you have the light coming in and it hits the back of your retina perfectly. If you have an eye that's shaped irregularly or elongated, the further away that focal point is from the retina, the more blurry the images that you see will become. So just that easy, we've been able to show cause and effect using animated images and user input using the property binding concept. Let's run this event and just test it without the message center showing. So here we have the interaction that we just created, and we'll go back to the edit mode. This concludes the tutorial on creating interactivity concepts. The following tutorials will build on these concepts.